Good afternoon, Nova Nation. Happy Labor Day. Wow, it feels great to say that. Once again here in the WXVU studio. Welcome here to Villanova University. Time for Villanova Sports Talk Season 3, Episode 1. David Szczepanski alongside Steve and Cain. Steve, we have a lot to get to today that we're going to put together in 30 minutes. A special announcement coming up at about 12:25. We have a lot to get to in our Villanova Football Labor Day special. But Steve, first of all, the most important question today. How was your summer? How are you doing? Great to see you.
Yeah, I know everyone's been dying to hear what I've been up to in the summer. That's actually why everyone tuned into this show. But anyway, yeah, my summer was good, David, but more importantly, yeah, excited to be back. Really excited to talk some Villanova football. These shows, especially early in the year, I think are very valuable for people to tune into, just because we can educate them on all the moves Villanova's been up to in the offseason, kind of expectations for what we can look for in the fall from them.
And it's great when you come back to school, especially in the first week, because, you know, you have so much going on trying to get used to classes, used to, you know, just getting back to campus again. But it's great because you have football right away. And yes, many teams in the CAA, I think every CAA team played this week, except for Villanova. The Wildcats had a game originally scheduled against Morgan State. That game was canceled. So really week one for Villanova is coming up this Saturday. But regardless, really looking forward to a great season. And again, WXVU is your student radio home for Villanova football, so make sure to tune in to all home games. We'll also have coverage for select road games, including Saturday, September the 13th at Happy Valley against Penn State. Looking forward to being there for that. But again, the first game coming up this Saturday, the season opener against new Patriot League foe Colgate. That's a great segue to get into the Patriot League. But before that, just want to say that you can always vote on the poll questions on my Twitter at WXVU David S. I have two of them for you today. The first one is, who will win Saturday's contest at Villanova Stadium, Villanova or Colgate? Then poll question number 2, who is Villanova's 2025 preseason MVP? And this is what I want to get into towards the end of the show. Is it the quarterback, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, Maddox or Pat McQuaid, Tanner Maddox or Pat McQuaid, Shane Hartzell, David Abbott, or Jake Picard? We'll talk about that and more coming up in the show. But want to get to probably the biggest news of the offseason, because there wasn't a whole lot, like personnel-wise, that really changed. I mean, there's some younger players coming up on the defense, some starters, of course, in and out more defensively than offensively, but that happens every season. But Villanova with a big switch a couple months ago, going to the Patriot League starting next year, so a little bittersweet here as we start this show. Last year for Villanova in the CAA, the Wildcats have had a lot of success in that conference. But Steve, I don't know about you, but I think a majority of Nova Nation out there, it was expected, just with, you know, Richmond leaving the CAA this year, heading to the Patriot League, William & Mary going to join suit. So Villanova and William & Mary, their last years in the conference is this year. And then also, I mean, the CAA losing Delaware to the FBS was also a loss for the conference. So just kind of want to get your general thoughts. It wasn't a surprise to me, but nonetheless, I think it's a good move for the program moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it is a little bittersweet. Coach Ferrante talked about how bittersweet it was that this upcoming season would be the last for Villanova in the CAA. It's been a conference that's been very good to the football program over the past few years and decades. It's gone through many different iterations, but as you said, Villanova joining the Patriot League, and I think from a geographic sense, there was a lot of talk when this news broke that Villanova, when comparing their football program to the programs of other schools, they were just very similar. I think geographically it just makes a lot of sense as well. You have a lot of schools that are pretty close to Villanova, which I think is good in terms of building regional rivalries and things like that. And yeah, having Richmond leave, having William & Mary leave, two teams that were really good in the CAA, especially the past few years, them leaving. If Villanova stayed in the CAA, you'd be concerned about a potential dip in competition with college football. It's not just how many teams you beat, but also who you beat as well. And the Patriot League, again, a couple years ago, definitely not as strong as the CAA, but now you see them as almost equals with Richmond and William & Mary joining them. So Villanova didn't want to feel left out, and they'll be joining them next year, so it'll be exciting.
I really like the point about geographically, and I know Coach Ferrante brought that up as well when the news was first announced that Villanova will be going to the Patriot League. I mean, now really the farthest you're going to be going is probably Colgate. Honestly,
Yeah.
You know, you have Georgetown in there, which is not far, Lehigh not far, so a lot of different reasons for the switch, but I think it made sense for Villanova in many different ways. But nonetheless, last year for Villanova in the CAA, and hopefully Villanova can make it a good one. We'll kind of walk you through the schedule here, and I know that the past couple of years we've kind of done a full segment, about 30 minutes or so, where we break down the schedule, give our thoughts and our final records. We'll probably do that more so next week, honestly, so we can kind of get all the information that we have to share. I know we have 30 minutes today here on this special. But again, Villanova going to start the season against Colgate on Saturday at Villanova Stadium, a place where Villanova has not lost since 2022. So it's been 3 years almost since Villanova has lost a game at Villanova Stadium. The Wildcats will take on Colgate this Saturday at 6 p.m. Our WXVU coverage will begin at 5:30 p.m. for the pregame show. You can hear Stephen and I along with Nathan Mather. Then the Wildcats will go to Penn State. We'll also have coverage for you that game at 3:30 p.m. That's a tough one, obviously, but a big one. I think I know Coach Ferrante has really talked about it, and I think the program as a whole, playing the other teams in the state. They're going to play Temple in a couple years. We won't be here anymore as a student, but looking forward to that matchup in a couple seasons. Then Villanova will go to Monmouth on September the 20th. That's a 1 p.m. game. Always a tough game against Monmouth. Villanova has not yet beaten Monmouth as a member of the CAA yet. Then Saturday, September 27th, the Wildcats will come back home versus William and Mary. On October the 4th, they'll travel to New Hampshire at 1 p.m. Then the following Saturday, back-to-back road games at Elon at 2 p.m. on October the 11th, followed by a home game against Hampton on October the 18th at 1 p.m. After that, Villanova will stay home for October the 25th against UAlbany at 3:30 p.m. before going on the road for the final time against Towson on November the 8th at 1 p.m. Then Villanova will play 2 final home games, including their CAA season finale and overall finale against Stony Brook on November the 15th at 1 p.m. And then they'll end their season in a non-conference battle, but against a Patriot League foe in Sacred Heart at 1 p.m. So that's a schedule for you in a nutshell. But, I mean, I don't want to say it's a difficult schedule for Villanova. It's not. The Wildcats don't play, they don't play Rhode Island, who is picked to win the conference. Villanova also, is able to get a home game against Stony Brook, which I think is a good thing. Stony Brook has received from some votes, but it is somewhat of a challenging schedule for Villanova. Just when you look at some of the road games they have to play, right at New Hampshire is always difficult, at Monmouth is always difficult. So, somewhat of a difficult schedule, but Villanova does get away from playing Rhode Island, which I think is a big, positive for them, just when you look at not having to play a tough team. But then again, it may come down to the standings at the end of the year. So, Steve, I just want to get your thoughts on the schedule. For me, I don't think it's terrible for Villanova. There are some other teams in the CAA that do have really tough schedules, having to play at Rhode Island and then some other tough games on the road. I think for Villanova, they did their best, or just looking at it, it does set up pretty nicely for them, especially the back half of their schedule, Steve, when they end it with things versus Hampton at home, versus UAlbany at home, on the road against Towson, and then versus Stony Brook and Sacred Heart at home. I think the back half of their schedule is going to help them. The first, 5 games or so, I think is going to be somewhat difficult.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You don't want to get off to a poor start, but you touched on it, David, and it almost feels like a lock that Villanova, really from that Hampton game in mid to late October through the rest of the season, that Villanova could maybe go 5-0 through that stretch, because a common theme with this Villanova program is that they seem to get better as the season progresses. But again, that could spell doom for the first half of the schedule, because you have that Colgate opener. Hopefully that gets things going for Villanova, and then you play at Penn State, at Monmouth to open CAA play, and then at home versus William and Mary. That's a tough game, and then back-to-back road games against New Hampshire and Elon. No bye there. Their bye is after the UAlbany game before the Towson game. So that'll be a really tough stretch for Villanova. If you can really only afford 1 or 2 losses through that stretch, and then you're thinking once when you get to the Hampton game, pretty much just run the table. I think those are pretty fair expectations for Villanova. But yeah, the split between the first half of that conference schedule and the second half is pretty staggering. And again, it suits Villanova's strengths in the second half of the schedule, but those first 4 games will probably define their season, because if you're thinking FCS playoffs, you're thinking finishing off your CAA tenure with a championship. Those first 4 games, you can't be dropping 2, maybe 2, but definitely not 3 games to those opponents. You definitely need to take care of business early and be ready for those opponents.
Yeah, it's really tough too, Steve, because you come off of the Penn State game playing a tough opponent, and then you're back on the road against Monmouth, like I said, a place that has not been kind to Villanova over the past couple of years, and a team that has not been kind to Villanova over the past couple of years. And then even after that, you come home to play a William and Mary team, which I think is going to be tougher than I think some people people do think William & Mary, just because they've underachieved the last couple seasons, but I still believe they're a good squad. They're predicted to finish 7th in the conference. We'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the final 5 games in the schedule, Villanova really has to run the table, especially if they don't get off to a hot start. So I think that back half of the schedule sets up well. We'll see how the front half really kind of assembles its way for Villanova. And I think a big part of that will be, one, how does the quarterback look, whoever it's going to be, which we'll talk about in a moment, and also, how does the defense look with a lot of the, starters, especially in terms of cornerbacks, leaving. How does Villanova fill that void? Well, Zamir DeWood, I think, is going to help out a lot. We'll talk about more, in details over the next couple of weeks and more in this episode as well. Want to get to now the CAA football predicted order of finish, just to touch on that a little bit. I know we like to do kind of this segment every season. I did mention it probably a couple minutes ago, but Rhode Island is predicted to finish first, and this is all voted on by the head coaches in the conference. Rhode Island with 163 overall points, but they have 8 first-place votes. Monmouth predicted to finish second with 142 points and 4 first-place votes. And Villanova sliding into the third-place spot, only 3 points behind Monmouth with 139 overall points and with 2 first-place votes. I think that's pretty fair. The rest of the way goes Stony Brook, New Hampshire, Towson, William & Mary, Elon, Maine, Campbell, Hampton, UAlbany, Bryant, and North Carolina A&T. I personally had Villanova in that number 2 spot ahead of Monmouth, but a lot of it will obviously come down to what does Villanova do in that Monmouth game head-to-head coming up on September the 20th. And then just kind of wanted to give some updates, of course, on the Stats Perform poll as well, the Top 25 poll. This was put out a couple weeks ago, the 2025 Stats Perform FCS preseason Top 25 poll. Villanova ranked 13th in that poll, and this is all FCS schools and programs, not just CAA. Rhode Island ranked 9th, Monmouth ranked 22nd, Stony Brook ranked 24th, and UNH receiving votes. And in the AFCA coaches FCS preseason Top 25 poll, very similar. Villanova also 13th. Rhode Island does fall 1 slot back to 10th, but it seems like in all of these polls, and I'll say the AFCA poll as well, Monmouth was ranked 21st. Villanova is convincingly ahead of Monmouth in the FCS preseason Top 25 polls. The only place where they're not is by vote of head coaches in the conference, which I thought is interesting. Steve, what's your thoughts on the predicted order of finish?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for Villanova just because of their success in the CAA and subsequently the FCS playoffs for the past few years. I think looking at the rest of the rankings for the conference, I think Monmouth, in a certain way, I think they're an interesting team. You really don't know what they're going to get. They're very high octane offensively, but that defense, there's going to be a lot of turnover there. And the defense, even on its own last season, when heading into last year, they had a lot of returning guys, and that didn't go very well. They're going to completely hit the reset button there, so we'll see. Rhode Island being on top, I think, makes a lot of sense. They have the Defensive Player of the Year in the CAA and A.J. Penna. Somebody who's just an absolute monster, 12.5 sacks. And then on offense, you have Devin Farrell, Marquise Buchanan. That'll be a really tough team in the CAA. Thank God Villanova doesn't have to play them. I think a sleeper, I think Towson. I've seen some people on CAA message boards be really high on Towson just because they finished the season really strong. They have a lot of guys coming back. Sean Brown has looked really good. They have Xavier Terry on defense, John Dunmore on offense, and their schedule is pretty light, so look out for Towson. And I think nationally for Villanova, I think it's pretty fair being in the teens range, maybe just outside the top 10. There's a little bit of uncertainty, I think, with how things could shake out, but you definitely can't doubt the quality on both sides of the ball for Villanova in a number of areas.
Yeah, I liked a lot of what you had to say there, Steve. We'll see, how Towson, does overall this season. They look good against Norfolk State, albeit Norfolk State, but still pretty convincing victory. And then just to touch on Monmouth, I mean, they have one of the best players in the conference in Derek Robertson, who really took a huge step forward last year. He was named to the FCS preseason Walter Payton Award watch list, which Connor Watkins was on last year. He's the preseason CAA Offensive Player of the Year, preseason All-CAA First Team, Stats Perform FCS preseason All-America First Team. You can just keep going on there. Phil Steele, preseason All-America First Team, and the awards really picked up for him last year. So he's a big part of why I think a lot of people in the conference are ranking Monmouth high, but it seems like nationally Monmouth is not getting that same recognition. again. Will be interesting to see how that plays out. And I agree with you, Steve. Thankfully, Villanova does not play Rhode Island because they are probably the most balanced team of them all in the conference, which makes sense of why they're predicted to finish first. I want to talk about some of the preseason award winners for Villanova. So for the preseason All-American first team, offensive lineman Jake Picard, who, he really doesn't get enough attention, I think, Steve. And, maybe because he's a lineman, I know that, the quarterbacks usually get a lot of the attention, running backs, wide receivers, defensively, linebackers, things like that. But, Jake Picard has done an excellent job for this team. He's been kind of that rock on the offensive line. And, it's a big reason why, Connor Watkins was able to have the success that, he had the past couple years was because of the line in front of him. And same thing with, the ability to run the football, which I talked to Isaiah Ragland and David Abbott the other day, and they were very thankful for the offensive line and just their work. So Jake Picard, big shout out to him. He had a great season last year, looking to continue that this season. And then preseason All-American second team for Shane Hartzell, which there's just so many good defensive players in the FCS. But Hartzell, second on the team in tackles behind Brendan Bell last year. Both of those guys combined for over 200 tackles, which is just insane. I know last year on the broadcast constantly called them the pillars of the offense, and they were. Villanova, of course, losing Brendan Bell this season. I believe, getting an opportunity with the Saints on their practice squad. I know he was able to sign a UDFA deal with them earlier this offseason. But Hartzell coming back, which is still good news for the Wildcats. And then David Abbott, Jake Picard, Abina Nwodo, and Shane Hartzell named to the 2025 CAA football preseason team. Stephane Voltaire was an honorable mention. So those are just some of the award winners. But for Villanova, I think, a lot of those names are great for the Cats at back. Shane Hartzell being one of them, of course, Jake Picard, but also David Abbott. And, he had, entered the transfer portal in the offseason. Talked to David, the other day. You can see that interview on my YouTube channel and on my Twitter. But, very, happy to be back at Villanova. And he said that everybody was great in welcoming him back. And I think that's, a big part now of the transfer portal is, there's so many players transferring nowadays, right? Of course, with the NIL and, of course, the House settlement, a couple months ago coming through, that, it's a tough spot, especially, when you enter the transfer portal and maybe end up deciding to come back to the team that you were looking to leave. But obviously, talking to David, it's clear that he loves it here and getting an opportunity to come back here to Villanova. So that's really good. But Steve, want to get your thoughts again here on the award winners. I think kind of maybe the one point you would bring up here is maybe just the fact that Hartzell isn't on the first team. But like I said, there's so many good linebackers in the FCS. But Hartzell, I think, getting a good slot there. And it's good to see Jake Picard, to get his award here. Well-deserving for him.
Yeah, and I'll start there, right? You brought up a good point, how the offensive lineman and also subsequently the defensive lineman, really that battle in the trenches, it doesn't get talked about a lot, really, when covering football in general, but it has a massive outcome on football games, right? You think about the Eagles winning the Super Bowl back in February. That's a huge strength of the Eagles. A lot of great FBS, FCS teams, right? A lot of talk is around the quarterback skill positions, but again, the offensive line can be very pivotal. And Jake Picard, he's played over 2,000 snaps. He's been relatively healthy, played over more than 700 last fall. And he's somebody that, as a center, right, he's great at snapping the football, and he's a great run blocker and pass blocker, which, again, are two different skill sets. He's very mobile as well, getting to the second level and taking linebackers out, creating pathways for David Abbott and Isaiah Ragland. And Stephane Voltaire, somebody, again, 870 snaps last season, all CAA honorable mention. He'll be really good at that left tackle spot, protecting either Pat McQuaid or Tanner Maddox there, potentially in the fall. And to the depth of this offensive line unit as well, Chris McCullers, Kyle Fay, Tommy Broderick, Ryan Cregan, Temi Ajaru-Tutu's back as well. He was an All-CA third-team selection in 2023, so I just think that'll be a strength of this team. And then Shane Hartzell, what else can you say about Shane Hartzell that hasn't already been said? He had around 120-something tackles last season, which is second among all players returning to play FCS football this year, which is just incredible. And somebody, again, that can get to the quarterback, can generate nice tackles for loss, can create havoc in the backfield. He's a good coverage player. And I think the most damning piece of evidence that he is the most important unit and most certainly or the most important player on this defensive unit was when he went down in that Monmouth game. The defense looked very, very different. He's such a big part of what the defense does. He's basically the quarterback of those 11 guys on the defensive side of the ball. So it's great to see him get recognition. And then David Abbott as well. It's great to have him back. He was really good down the stretch, kind of like this Villanova program, how they get better as the season went on. It felt like David Abbott did that. He really hit his stride in that stretch against LIU and Stony Brook last season. Stony Brook, he rushed for almost 200 yards, had 4 touchdowns. And then down the stretch, he wasn't running for as many yards, but he was scoring touchdowns and was really a big part in Villanova, even though they didn't win the conference, getting into the playoffs. So it's just great for a lot of those guys to get the recognition they deserve. But obviously, you know that these players really don't care about the individual accolades. They want to just stack up wins, make it back to the playoffs.
To speak a little bit about Avid as well, he finished with the Villanova freshman record of 923 yards in a season, also had 9 touchdowns. And, you know, in addition to Avid and how good he was, I mean, Isaiah Ragland finished with 511 net yards last year with 4 touchdowns, and he was injured in the middle part of the year, missed, I believe, 2 or 3 games. He missed 2 games, and then at the end of the year, you know, was kind of behind David Avid in a way just because of the way that everything worked out and how good, you know, Avid was rushing. But, I mean, really, you know, 2 great running backs at the top, and also Jabril Mace. I'm really excited to see Mace. I know a lot of people talk about the X factor, and I think Mace could really be a difference maker at the open practice in Ocean City. He was punt returning for Villanova, which is huge, because last year Villanova had a big problem in the punt return department. I mean, Tanner Maddox at the end of the season kind of made it to be an okay you know, situation, but Devin Smith had a few you know, muff punts there in there as well. So you know, I think this is going to be good for the Wildcats to have a guy like Mace back there. Steve, I'll use one of your favorite words, who was so shifty, but you know, just his explosiveness, his athleticism, I think is huge, and he's really difficult to tackle, which is going to be great for Villanova when returning punts this year. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. I want to switch gears a little bit here to the quarterback conversation, and you know, this is you know, yes, it took us 20 minutes to get to, but wanted to kind of recap things on the offseason. This is the biggest conversation around the team, is who is going to start on, you know, 5 days from now on Saturday, September the 6th. And you know, Tanner Maddox, if you had asked me, you know, 2 months ago who was going to be the starting quarterback, I would have easily have said Tanner Maddox, because he's been the guy that, you know, has been in the system the past couple of years. He's been behind Connor. In a lot of ways, I think that Maddox has a similar skill set to Connor, his ability to scramble, get out of the pocket. You know, I think at times we also saw his ability to throw the ball, especially in that game against Maryland. I know it was very late, but I thought he made a couple nice passes on the run. But Pat McQuaid coming in from Nicholls State, and when you look at his stats from last year, 2,196 yards. He broke a lot of different historical records there at Nicholls State last year. He had 13 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, which I think is something that Villanova, you know, is going to keep an eye on. He also rushed for negative 42 yards last year. So I think when you, sorry, he had 2,218 passing yards last year. I apologize, 2,196 the year before. So he's thrown for over 4,400 yards in his college career so far at Nicholls State, but there are some issues there with the interceptions. He's not exactly what you think of when you think of a Villanova quarterback. Just over the past couple of years, they've been more to put somebody back there who, you know, could scramble, run around a little bit. Pat McQuaid is more of that slinger kind of guy, going to throw the football down the field. So we'll see, you know, how that matches up, but it really seems like over the past couple of weeks that Pat McQuaid has kind of taken over the first team opportunities, the reps at the Ocean City practice. He was the guy who led them out on the first drive. What Connor Watkins had done the last couple of years, Pat McQuaid did end up throwing a touchdown in that first drive at the Ocean City Open practice. So it seems like McQuaid's going to get the spot. Villanova still has a couple more practices left to go this week, but it does seem like that it's McQuaid's spot to lose at least at this point.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, mainly just because of the high upside you could have potentially with a guy like McQuaid, his ability to throw the football down the field, really make some nice throws into tight windows, and really potentially unlock a dimension of this Villanova offense that really hasn't been unlocked in the past few years, right? Villanova with Connor Watkins, it was a lot of shorter passes and then relying on guys like Jalen Sanchez in years past, Ron Pringle to make plays after the catch. But with Pat McQuaid, he's somebody that can sling the ball down the field. He's more of an arm strength guy and more of a pure pocket passer. And you brought up Nicholls State last year. It wasn't a great season for Nicholls State. They went 4-8, and he did have problems turning the football over. But I think part of that, maybe I'm making excuses for him a little bit, that there were reports from Nicholls State that he was being more used as a game manager, just kind of the system wasn't the best fit for him. I think if Villanova, if they're going to go with McQuaid as the starter, they need to be okay with letting him loose a little bit, being a pure pocket passer, somebody that can keep his eyes down the field, can make multi-level reads, do things like that. And then if Villanova goes to Tanner Maddox, which is still possible, there could be a scenario where maybe they go with Tanner Maddox in the beginning, inning and they keep him on a really short leash, and if he struggles, Coach Ferrante says, okay, Tanner, you're out. We're going to put Pat McQuaid and see what we have there. But Tanner Maddox is somebody that's very similar to Connor Watkins, kind of bigger, can run, right? Pat McQuaid can scramble a little bit, move around in the pocket, but Tanner Maddox can actually run, really make some big plays with his legs, can truck defenders and things like that. So it'll just be interesting to see what Villanova has. And I think, again, what's great about all this is that I mentioned it earlier, you have a lot of great offensive line depth. You have a really loaded runner back room, pretty much everyone returning. And that could be enough. Even if you have a lot of uncertainty at quarterback, you really don't know what's going on. Again, the first half of the schedule will be very difficult, but if the offensive line's really good, gives these guys protection in the passing game, and they open up lanes for David Abbott and Isaiah Ragland to take advantage of, that could potentially be enough. You have Luke Colella coming from Princeton. You have some talent in the wide receiver room. But again, if that running game really cooks and if Villanova just doesn't turn the football over, that could be enough to overwhelm a lot of teams on its own.
Wanted to clarify something I had said earlier. I corrected myself on the yards, but Pat McQuaid last year, 14 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. In his college career, 27 passing touchdowns, 21 interceptions. Didn't want to clear that up from earlier. Yeah. But specifically, I agree with you, Steve. I think the system at Nicholls State was not the best for him. I mean, just to kind of put that into maybe a stat, 53 sacks for him in 2 years. The offensive line was not very good at Nicholls State. So obviously having, we talked about the depth of the offensive line earlier, that's going to help him, especially, being that pocket passer that he is. But, anytime you go into a season and there's uncertainty around the quarterback, that usually doesn't tend to being a phenomenal offensive team. Maybe, Pat McQuaid really has yet to hit that ceiling. Maybe it's, a change of scenery and he really, takes over, limits the interceptions, which is, the biggest thing for him. But, not saying that Villanova is Youngstown State, but I think it is an example last year where Youngstown State was coming into the year with, a lot of different weapons on the offensive side of the football, pretty good defense, but the one spot they had some issues with was quarterback, Bo Brungard, and they had the backup, and just the whole year things didn't really seem to get, where they needed to be. Not to say that the situation going on here with Villanova, but anytime there's uncertainty around the quarterback, it's going to take some time, especially with the way Villanova's been the last couple of years, kind of slow starting. That does concern me, especially when you look at their schedule. You look at, having to get guys back in rhythm. There could be, some growing pains for Villanova, and unfortunately, if you really struggle in that first half of the schedule, which is difficult, it could, result in disaster for Villanova, similar to what it was in 2022, a couple of years ago. Just kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit, but I think Villanova's in a really good spot, and mainly because you talked about, the running back room is stacked. David Abbott, Isaiah Ragland coming back, Isaiah Wright, Jabril Mace, who I talked about earlier. They really have so many different options they could go to, and, a couple of years ago, when TD, Jalen, and D-Will had left, a lot of the conversation was, well, how's the running back core going to be, because that was such a major part of Villanova's offense. Well, they kind of quieted all doubt last year. Not kind of, absolutely demolished all doubt last year, so that was fun to see. When you look at Villanova coming up, of course, the season opener on Saturday against Colgate as we begin to wrap things up here on Villanova Sports Talk on this Labor Day special. David Szczepanski, Stephen Cain with you here. Colgate was not a good team last year. 2-10. A lot of things went wrong. Their defense could not get a stop especially in the last 5 or 6 games of the season. Overall, the Raiders allowed more than 31 points per game last year. They allowed at least 45 points in 3 of their final 5 games. So just a really bad season there in Hamilton, New York. But they hired a new head coach this year, Curt Fitzpatrick, who won a D3 championship a couple years ago in 2023 with Cortland. He's known for being an offensive guy, really being able to get the most out of his quarterbacks. And the other night, we'll talk about Zach Osborne and Jake Sterney a little bit, but they look pretty good against a Monmouth defense, which we talked about. There's some questions, but still a Monmouth team that is projected to finish high in the CAA. So a new coach coming in, and then, of course, their quarterback situation, also somewhat of a question. Zach Osborne took over for Colgate this season. Coming into the game on Saturday against Monmouth, he was 61 for 92 with 5 touchdown passes in his college career. He started the game for Colgate on Saturday, went 11 for 14 with 227 yards and 2 touchdowns. Colgate led Monmouth 24-7 at halftime, and then Osborne got injured in the third quarter, and Jake Sterney, who is the previous starting quarterback for Colgate last year, came into the game, junior quarterback from Chicago. He played in 11 games last year, was really their starter, and he looked pretty good. Had 138 yards, had a touchdown, was though 10 for 23, so a little inaccurate at times, but coming off the bench in a situation that I'm sure was not great for him, especially being the starter last year and losing his job. I thought all things considered he looked pretty good. So maybe that is something to say about Curt Fitzpatrick and the job that he's done. But I think the overall message about Colgate here is, they did lose to Monmouth 42-39. They let Monmouth score 35 unanswered points there in the second half of that game. And Monmouth's offense, I think, is better than Villanova's, but Villanova's defense is much better than Monmouth. So when you match that up here, I think Villanova is in a really good spot for this game against Colgate. But really what it comes down to, I think here for Villanova is, how does the offense look? Because Villanova went up to Hamilton, New York last year, and their offense really struggled in the first half. Villanova was, I believe they were up by 6 points at halftime last year. I'll go back and see if I can find that. But Villanova did not play well against Colgate's defense last year. So, they have to get off to somewhat of a hot start. Something else too here, Steve, is that Colgate has already played a game. So they're more in rhythm than Villanova, even though it was a loss for Colgate. Villanova, this is their first game. Maybe they're going to have to knock off some of the rust. So this could be, I'm not going to use the word trap game here in game one, right? They've been preparing for this one. But this could be a game that I don't think Nova Nation should overlook as a guarantee win, because Colgate was tough the other day against Monmouth. And in addition to that, I think they're just, at a good spot with Kurt Fitzpatrick as the head coach.
Yeah, and I think, too, Villanova, they played Colgate at home 2 years ago, and that wasn't a huge issue for Villanova. And Colgate, you mentioned it was a dumpster fire of a season last year, 2-10, and they didn't win a single game on the road. Again, I don't think that'll change in their first road game against Villanova on September 6th. I think some positives for Colgate, I think, is the fact that they have pretty much their entire receiving core coming back. Trayvon Saunders is going to be back, somebody that was fifth in all of college football, so FBS and FCS in terms of receptions. He's somebody that was a real thorn in the side for Villanova. You bring up that game last year in Hamilton, New York. He was a bit of a problem in certain spots. Brady Hutchinson as well, somebody who's getting East-West Shrine Bowl attention. Keep in mind, he's not even their top receiver. Trayvon Saunders is somebody that had 44 catches, 540 yards, 5 touchdowns last year. Somebody that just gets in the end zone a lot. Maybe not racks up as many yards as Trayvon Saunders, but Hutchinson, kind of a bigger body. Definitely somebody that Jake Sterney or Zach Osborne can look for in the end zone on a big money down third or fourth down. And they have a lot of depth at that position too. And with Villanova's secondary, there's a lot of talk there with Zamir Dawood. It's going to rest on his shoulders, I think, if the secondary continues to play well like it was last year with Ice Waxter and others. And it'll definitely be put to the test. It'll be a good wide receiving core that the Villanova secondary will be put up against. But I agree with you, David. Villanova, they have a lot of quality, and I think the real mismatch is in the trenches. There's a ton of turnover, only one returning starter for Colgate on the offensive line, and then on the defensive line, I believe it's the same thing. 3 of those 4 guys that play 4-man front are gone. You have Dane Picarello as the linebacker, but again, I mean, you're talking about somebody that isn't going to be at the line of scrimmage that often. So you're just looking at that battle in the trenches. Villanova's going to have that advantage, and you think particularly in the running game for Villanova, Colgate, they're not great defensively in a lot of spots, but particularly that rushing defense could be torn to shreds on Saturday.
And to talk a little bit about Trayvon Saunders, 223 yards against Monmouth, 13 receptions, 2 touchdowns just in one game in the season opener against the Hawks. And he's a guy that over the last couple of years has put together over 1,600 receiving yards. So he is probably the main man to stop on offense for Colgate. And Steve, I think he did a really nice job of summing it up. And Villanova defensively, I guess we'll kind of end things here. We'll get to the poll questions in a little bit. But defensively, for Villanova, as you said, I think a lot of it's going to come down to how good does Zamir Dawood play this year. Taking that next step forward. He looked really good last year. I know that there's been a lot of talk about him, FCS nationally, about him being able to take that next step as kind of that rising star defensively in the CAA. We'll see if he can, take that next step. If he does, could be a really good season for Villanova on defense. But again, this is a team that last year only gave up 18 points per game. I doubt they're going to be that good again, especially with a lot of the changing changing of the players in terms of the starters. I mean, you lose Isis Waxter, who was just phenomenal back there for Villanova. You saw a lot of teams, purposely put their top wide receiver away from him, and just being able to use him as kind of that strategy piece, I thought was really helpful for the defense and Coach Pennypacker last year. But also, I think Richie Kimmel coming back is great with Hartzell. Kimmel, I know, did not have as many tackles and didn't get as much attention as Brendan Bell, but he had a really nice season last year. Had some big interceptions late in the games for the Wildcats as well. And then also too, just kind of watching the open practice, seems like that Jason Hall could get some good play for Villanova this year. Turner Inge, who I know, Steve, we talked about as well last year. J.R. Strauss as well, I think, has some opportunities to get some more playing time this year. And we'll really see how especially I think the defensive backs is the biggest question. We talked about Zamir Dawood, but also Newton Essiem, who, I know Coach Ferrante has talked a lot about, Caleb Moody as well, so we'll continue to watch what happens defensively. But I think it is going to be, kind of a process here for Villanova, and it's going to take some time to kind of figure things out. How does Villanova look the best defensively? If there is, though, kind of the positive point to all this is that in that game against Incarnate Word, when Villanova just was stacked up with injuries defensively, the younger guys, especially Zamir Dawood, had really stepped up. And Incarnate Word is a really good team. They lost to Nicholls State about a week ago, but still, a really good team last year. They had a really explosive offense, and Villanova's defense, a lot of their younger players stepped up. So that's definitely a sign of encouragement. Steve, I want to get to the poll questions here on this Labor Day. We have 2 poll questions for you. Our first one is who will win Saturday's contest at Villanova Stadium? Pretty simple here in terms of answer choices, Villanova or Colgate. Steve, where do you go?
I'll go Villanova. I think going back to the one point that I brought up about the trench battle, and I focused on how lopsided it is for Villanova's offensive line versus Colgate's defensive line. Flip it the other way, Colgate's offensive line, only 1 starter returning. And then Villanova's defensive line, it's pretty solid, particularly on the interior. You have Abena Wabodo, who I, again, mistakenly omitted from the award section, so apologize there. But again, 40 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, which is super dominant, and can get his hands up, break up the passes, can get after the quarterback, so he's not just a typical run stuffer. Capri Martin, Nigel McSween was really good as a freshman. These are all interior guys. The edge depth for Villanova maybe is a little thin, but you have Aiden Howard coming back. So.
Yeah, 1.5 sacks last year for Aiden Howard, 44 total tackles. I think he's in a good spot to surpass those numbers, and that would be huge for Villanova's defensive line.
It would be very huge. And again, you go up against a Colgate offensive line that again probably should roll over against his Villanova defensive front. And again, with Villanova's offensive line versus Colgate's defense, I think Villanova takes care of business by probably 2 touchdowns.
We'll see if Osborne plays in this game, if he's a starting quarterback, or if Sterney will start again. Sterney was the starting quarterback last year for Colgate, lost the competition to Osborne. I'm going to go in similar fashion here with Villanova, but I will say that this game could be closer than I think some people projected to be. What was the rating? Was it -20 Villanova's favored by?
It was -20. I don't know if Villanova's covering that.
I think that's a pretty steep ask for Villanova, especially with Colgate already having played a game. Villanova, I think it's going to take them a quarter or so to really get back into things, and especially, see what happens at the quarterback position. Villanova could come out here and look really good, and they haven't lost a game at Villanova Stadium in almost 3 years, as I said in the beginning of the show. I think Villanova takes care of business, but I agree with you. I see it somewhere more in the 10 points to 2 touchdown kind of range for Villanova when it's all said and done. I don't think that would be a bad thing because Colgate did look pretty good at home against Monmouth last week. Poll question number 2, who is Villanova football's 2025 preseason MVP? Tanner Maddox / Pat McQuaid at the quarterback spot, Shane Hartzell, David Abbott, and Jake Picard. And I guess maybe I worded this question kind of poorly from what I was trying to get to, but in a way, who is the X factor, or who is the player that Villanova really needs to be, a consistent, really kind of star for this team when you look at this season? And I know that maybe I didn't word that as best as I could have on the poll question, but I think based on the results, I think a lot of people still kind of got what I was meaning from that.
I hinted at this earlier. I think it probably has to be David Abbott because I do sense maybe a little bit of unstableness with Villanova in the quarterback room the first few games. And I just think back to last season. Connor Watkins was amazing in 2023. He had a great season. He was the preseason CAA Offensive Player of the Year. And then last year, he played good, but that was a talking point that we were beating death on half the games where Villanova would win, but Connor Watkins would play okay. But Villanova was still winning a lot of these games, and a lot of it was because of good defense. So you could also go Shane Hartzell, but it was a lot of really good running back play. And again, David Abbott really came on, especially down the stretch for Villanova, even though Connor Watkins was playing good but not great football, doing enough to win. So I think it could be a rare instance. Usually, again, the quarterback is the most important spot. I think David Abbott's primed for a sophomore breakout, and it's encouraging, or maybe not even breakout because he was so great last year, but he could even elevate his play from what we saw as a freshman. I think it's encouraging that he came back. He thought about the portal. comes back, that kind of tells you he's really all in on Villanova this year.
I agree, Steve. That's where I go as well with David Abbott. But, this running back room is extremely talented. We've said it many times here on the show. And they have so many. It's going to be very curious to see, how does the offense look, because there's so many different ways that you could go with the running backs. Abbott, Ragland, who are both really good, just, straight up, explosiveness through the middle. But also, Jabril Mace, especially what he could do in space last year. We saw that when they would put him on routes. And I think that Villanova is going to use the running back not just as an opportunity to run the football, but also, to pick up some yards, whether it's a quick check down pass to the running back in space. We saw Mace do that a few times, especially up the sideline. There were a few times last year I remember he had like 30 plus yards on a space that really just Villanova was able to give the defense to shade the other way, and Jabril Mace had a great opportunity. So I'm really high on Jabril Mace. We haven't talked you haven't sensed it from my voice. Being able to see him at open practice a couple weeks ago, I think he's going to have a big season. But David Abbott is my choice here because he broke a Villanova freshman record last year, and that was with him in the first couple games not getting a whole lot of carries, with Ragland getting a majority of the activity, and then also at the end of the year, this is when Abbott I think kind of got worn down a little bit just because it was his first collegiate season, and he was getting so many carries, 23 carries, 25 carries a game, and to ask a true freshman for that I think is difficult, night in and night out. So Abbott, I think the sky's the limit for him this year. I think as long as he stays healthy, I think it's clear that he should get to 1,000 yards this year. We'll see. With Ragland being healthier, maybe that kind of limits the opportunities in a way. But the running back, the possibilities for the running back room is just great. But I think it really comes down to this season for Villanova. They have to be able to get some sort of consistent quarterback play. Pat McQuaid, Tanner Maddox, whoever is the starter. Like I said, at this moment, I believe it is Pat McQuaid. They don't have to play amazing. You don't have to do what Derek Robertson does with just 500 yards a game basically for Monmouth. But you just have to, in a sense, what McQuaid did the last couple years at Nicholls State, kind of be that game manager, help Villanova, especially when they need to pick up, some yardage. I think that's going to be the biggest spot to watch out for. Obviously, the quarterback is, you could argue the most important position on the team, and for good right. I think that a lot comes down to that decision on how does the quarterback play, and also too, what does the wide receiver core look like? We mentioned some names. Kenyon Miles coming back, I think is big for Villanova. He was kind of the top target. Lucas Kopecki getting another year of eligibility is also big. You talked about Coella coming in from Princeton, but Villanova did have some trouble last year. When Watkins was healthy, just not really being on the same page with his receivers. And I think a lot of the receivers, especially coming off a year where you had guys like Jaron Hayek, Rajon Pringle, it was really difficult to kind of match that offense and the offensive production. So, we'll see how things go. My answer here is David Abbott, and, the general public agreeing with me here. 41.7% for Abbott, 25% for Shane Hartzell, the 16.7% for Maddox and McQuaid, and also Jake Picard. But, it's no secret. Villanova has to find consistent play at the quarterback position. I think Pat McQuaid starts 5 days from today.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like the point that you hit on, where if you take Connor Watkins' play from last year and you put it into Pat McQuaid's body or Tanner Max's body, I don't know how you would do that, right? But a 1-to-1 transfer of those numbers to one of those two guys, whoever the starter ends up being, and you assume the running back game is good for Villanova. The defense is pretty good. I think they'll probably make the FCS playoffs again, contend in the CAA. You don't need super elite play. I completely agree with that. I don't think you need to have these crazy high expectations. And I liked what you said about the receivers. I'm also looking at the secondary as well, just because Zamir Dawood, it's really going to be huge for him to step up. He made some really great interceptions, some nice pass breakups, and they have some transfers coming in. Julian Talley from Penn, Jordan Adderley from Lehigh. Julian Talley had almost 100 tackles in his Penn career. Jordan Adderley, somebody who had a really nice pick six for Lehigh last season, 34 tackles, and somebody, again, who played over 500 snaps last year. So both those guys could be healthy. Again, coming in, how are they going to complement Newton Esium, Caleb Moody? That'll be really interesting as well, because, again, if you're playing some of these really good offenses, right, think about Monmouth. Think about September 20th and playing Derek Robertson and all those receivers. And
we'll be there. It'll be a fun one.
Yeah, Talley, Adderley, Moody, Dawood, all of them, Esium, they're all going to be tested, right, to put it simply. And, again, that'll be the third game of the season. You want to start off the CAA with a win. That'll be a really huge game for Villanova. And, again, just throughout the year, you got to have good secondary play, really good depth there. So
Well, time will tell, Steve. Getting ready for the season opener, the 2025 season opener on Saturday, September the 6th. Again, our pregame coverage on WXVU will begin at 5:30 p.m. 6 p.m. is kickoff. Looking forward to a great day at Villanova Stadium. The season opener is always packed, especially with a lot of the freshmen and their families coming out. It's a great day. So if you can't be there at Villanova Stadium, be sure to tune in here on WXVU, your official student radio home for Villanova football. I'm David Szczepanski for Stephen Cain. Hope you have a great day, Nova Nation. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at WXVU and on Instagram at WXVU.sports. Have a great Labor Day. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Before I go, I almost forgot about this special announcement. It's official. The new Villanova Sports Talk day and time will be Mondays from 12 to 1 p.m. I know we went past a half an hour today, but just wanted to kind of get things started here on the right note before the football game on Saturday. But 12 to 1 p.m., full hour. We'll have some exciting player and coach interviews like we did last year. We'll talk about Villanova football, Villanova men's and women's basketball coming up in a little bit, and just everything Villanova athletics. If you like what you heard here, stay tuned for more episodes. We'll be back here 1 week from today on Monday, September the 8th. Looking forward to that from 12 to 1 p.m. right here on WXVU. For Stephen Cain, I'm David Szczepanski. Have a great Labor Day, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. And as always, go Cats!